Imagine it's November 1922. You're a shopkeeper named Heinrich, standing behind the counter of your hardware store in Berlin. This morning, a pound of butter costs 800 marks. By evening, it cost 200 marks. You've been watching this for months. At first, you did what everyone else did. You trusted the banks. You kept your savings in marks. You believed the government when they said the currency would stabilize. But 3 months ago, you made a decision your neighbors thought was reckless. You stopped saving money. Every day, you took whatever marks came into your register and immediately converted them into something. Nails, hammers, copper fittings, American dollars from the black market trader 2 streets over, a small plot of farmland outside the city. Your brother-in-law called you paranoid. By December, his entire savings account couldn't buy a loaf of bread. You, on the other hand, owned things, real things. And in an economy where paper had become worthless, real things were the only things that mattered. This isn't a fairy tale. This is documented history. The same pattern appeared in Hungary in 1946, in Argentina in 1989, in Zimbabwe in 2008, in Venezuela starting in 2016. Every time a currency collapses, a small minority of people, not geniuses, just people who recognize the pattern early, quietly convert their paper wealth into specific categories of assets. When the dust settles, they emerge wealthier than before. The people who didn't see it coming lost everything. Today, we're conducting a forensic examination of history's hyperinflationary events. We're identifying the 6 categories of assets that consistently preserved and multiplied wealth for those who acquired them before collapse. This isn't speculation. This is pattern recognition from documented evidence spanning a century of monetary failures. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Before examining what people bought, we need to understand what hyperinflation actually is. Most people think it's just really bad inflation. Prices rising fast. Government printing too much money. That's technically true, but it misses the critical dynamic. Hyperinflation is not primarily a monetary event. It's a psychological event. Every economy runs on a shared fiction. The fiction that these pieces of paper have value. Not because they're backed by gold, but because everyone agrees to pretend they have value. This fiction works beautifully for decades, sometimes centuries. But it has a vulnerability. It depends on trust. When that trust erodes, slowly at first, then suddenly, the fiction unravels. Here's the mechanism. A government faces fiscal crisis. It cannot raise enough revenue through taxes. It cannot borrow from willing lenders, so it creates new money. At first, this works. Prices rise slightly. People grumble, but continue their lives. Then something shifts. People notice prices rising faster than wages. They spend paychecks faster. Why hold marks when they'll be worth less tomorrow? This is velocity. Faster spending has the same effect as printing more money. Prices rise faster. The government prints more to keep up. At a certain point, the loop becomes self-sustaining. Trust collapses entirely. In Weimar Germany, workers demanded payment twice daily. They ran out during lunch to buy goods before their morning wages lost value. In Zimbabwe, prices doubled every 24.7 hours at the peak. In Hungary, 1946, prices doubled every 15 hours. The highest denomination printed was 100 quintillion pengo. While the majority watched savings evaporate, a minority converted paper wealth into real assets before acceleration became obvious. These people didn't get rich traditionally. They preserved purchasing power while everyone lost it. In hyperinflation, that's the same thing as getting rich. 1. Foreign currency. The first category is straightforward. Foreign currency from economically stable nations. In Weimar Germany, that meant American dollars, British pounds, Swiss francs. In Argentina, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, it meant dollars. The pattern is identical across time and geography. When a domestic currency collapses, it doesn't collapse against everything simultaneously. It collapses against other currencies first. This creates an arbitrage window. In early hyperinflation, it's still possible to convert domestic currency at rates that haven't fully priced in the catastrophe. Consider Weimar Germany. January 1919, 8.9 marks to $1. November 1923, 4.2 trillion marks to $1. Anyone who converted marks to dollars in 1919 preserved their wealth almost entirely. Anyone who waited until 1923 found foreign currency nearly impossible to obtain. Black markets existed, but possession could mean arrest for currency treason. Zimbabwe followed the same pattern. In 2006, roughly 100,000 Zimbabwe dollars bought $1 US. Uncomfortable but manageable. Those with foreign currency access began accumulating dollars. By late 2008, the official rate was meaningless. Early dollar holders weren't just preserved, they were fabulously wealthy relative to neighbors. Venezuela, identical trajectory. In 2012, 4.3 bolivars to the dollar. By 2019, the government stopped publishing exchange rate data. Dollar holders became the only people who could reliably purchase goods. The constraint is access. In early stages, banks still conduct exchanges. Black markets are smaller. Cross-border transactions work. As hyperinflation accelerates, governments impose capital controls. Currency exchange becomes illegal. The window closes. By the time newspapers scream about hyperinflation, it's too late. The transfer has already happened. 2. Real estate and land. The second category is tangible property. Land, buildings, productive real estate. This is counterintuitive. Real estate prices rise dramatically in nominal terms during hyperinflation. A house costing 50,000 marks in 1920 might cost 500 billion by 1923. But that's not why real estate made people rich. The mechanism is different. It's about debt. Most real estate is purchased with borrowed money. A mortgage, fixed payments over fixed periods. When hyperinflation hits, that fixed debt becomes meaningless. Consider a German merchant in 1919 purchasing an apartment building. He borrows 200,000 marks. Monthly payment, 2,000 marks. By 1923, 2,000 marks cannot buy a postage stamp. He pays off his entire mortgage with pocket change. He owns the building outright. The bank received worthless paper for valuable real estate. This isn't theoretical. This is exactly what happened. Hugo Stinnes exploited this mechanism to become one of Europe's wealthiest men. He borrowed aggressively in marks to purchase mines, factories, forests, newspapers. When the market collapsed, his debts evaporated. He kept the assets. At his peak, Stinnes controlled over 4,500 enterprises. The same pattern appeared everywhere. In Argentina in 1989, those with fixed-rate peso mortgages received properties essentially free. In Zimbabwe, land ownership became the primary store of value. In Venezuela, real estate prices in bolivars increased incomprehensibly. But in dollar terms, Venezuelan real estate crashed, creating opportunities for hard currency holders. The constraint is timing and credit access. In early currency instability, lenders still extend domestic currency loans. Interest rates are high but rarely price in true hyperinflation risk. Human psychology prevents it. Those who borrow to purchase real assets in this window benefit enormously. When hyperinflation becomes obvious, lending freezes. The window closes. There's another aspect. Shelter is fundamental. No matter what happens to currency, people need places to live. After stabilization, property owners charge rents in the new currency. Their asset maintained utility throughout crisis. This is why property owners consistently emerged as the post-crisis upper class. Not because real estate is magical, because real estate is real. 3. Precious metals. The third category requires the least explanation. Gold, silver. This is the oldest wealth preservation strategy in human history. It works for a simple reason. Precious metals cannot be printed. Supply is constrained by geology. No government decree can create more gold. No central bank policy can debase silver. In Weimar Germany, gold ownership was legal until 1923. By then, gold holders had already won. The numbers are striking. January 1919, 1 ounce of gold cost 170 marks. November 1923, 1 ounce cost 87 trillion marks. Anyone who converted savings to gold in 1919 could convert back after stabilization with purchasing power almost perfectly preserved. Neighbors who held marks lost everything. The pattern recurred everywhere. In Zimbabwe, gold became shadow currency. Small mines operated throughout the country. Gold dust was traded directly for goods. In Venezuela, gold serves similar function. The government has repeatedly attempted confiscation precisely because gold represents escape from their monetary system. This is the repeating pattern. Governments facing hyperinflation eventually try preventing citizens from protecting themselves. They ban foreign currency, they confiscate gold, they impose capital controls. These measures are always implemented too late. The constraint is access and storage. During normal times, purchasing gold is straightforward. During crises, physical gold becomes scarce. Premiums rise dramatically. Counterfeiting increases. Those who accumulated before had access at reasonable premiums. Those who tried during paid 50%, 100% premiums, if they found gold at all. Gold is also portable. Unlike real estate, gold can be physically transported. Jewish families escaping Nazi Germany carried wealth in coins sewn into clothing. Venezuelan refugees carried gold across borders. A brick of gold the size of a smartphone can represent hundreds of thousands in purchasing power. Try that with an apartment building. 4. Productive business, assets, and inventory. The fourth category is less obvious but perhaps most important for ordinary people. Productive business assets, inventory, tools, raw materials. This saved the Berlin shopkeeper from our opening. Here's the mechanism. In hyperinflation, physical goods hold value in ways currency cannot. A hammer is still a hammer. A sack of flour is still a sack of flour. These items have utility value independent of price tags. Business owners who understood this converted cash to inventory immediately. In Weimar Germany, merchants received marks and immediately spent them on more inventory. They called it the flight to real values, understanding that any physical good was superior to paper claims. A shop starting with 10,000 marks inventory might end with 50 trillion marks inventory, but more importantly, they ended with roughly the same physical goods. Their purchasing power, stored in product rather than paper, remained intact. Competitors who kept profits in bank accounts watched accounts become worthless. After stabilization, merchants with inventory continued operating immediately. They had goods to sell. They were positioned to thrive. Those who held cash started from nothing. The same pattern appeared in Zimbabwe. Business owners stockpiling inventory, food, fuel, building materials, maintained economic position. Those operating normally, keeping cash reserves, found reserves evaporating daily. One Zimbabwean businessman converted his entire working capital into diesel fuel, stored in tanks on his property. When the dollar became worthless, he had something valuable. He could trade diesel for food, sell it for US dollars, power his generators while the grid collapsed. His competitors went out of business. The constraint is storage and spoilage. Not all inventory is equal. Perishables can't be stockpiled indefinitely, but durable goods, hardware, machinery, raw materials, can be held. Successful survivors chose carefully. They prioritized goods that were essential, durable, and difficult to produce domestically. This strategy also worked at individual level. Households stockpiling essentials, food, medicine, supplies, avoided the desperate scramble. They didn't spend hours in bread lines. They didn't accept extortionate prices for necessities. A well-stocked pantry became a savings account the government couldn't devalue. This isn't metaphor. This is what people actually did. 5. Equities in productive companies. The fifth category surprises most people. Stocks. Conventional wisdom says markets crash during crises. In nominal terms against stable foreign currencies, often true. But measured in collapsing domestic currency, stock markets during hyperinflation rise to astronomical levels. Here's why. A share of stock represents partial ownership of a real enterprise. That enterprise owns real assets, factories, equipment, inventory. It produces real goods. When currency collapses, those assets don't disappear. The factory still exists. The machinery still works. What changes is the number of currency units required to represent value. In Weimar Germany, the stock market rose dramatically in marked terms throughout hyperinflation. But here's the key. Measured in gold or foreign currency, German stocks also declined significantly. They didn't fully protect against hyperinflation. However, critically, they protected far better than holding marks. Someone holding 10,000 marks cash in 1919 had nothing by 1923. Someone holding 10,000 marks worth of stocks in 1919 lost perhaps 70-80% real purchasing power by 1923. Not good, but vastly better than total loss. And those who bought stocks during hyperinflation using depreciating marks often saw extraordinary real returns. The mechanism is similar to real estate debt. Buy stocks with borrowed money. Currency collapses. Debt becomes trivial. Asset ownership remains. German speculators borrowing marks to purchase industrial shares ended hyperinflation owning shares outright. Debt obligations reduced to nothing. This required nerves of steel. Markets are volatile. Margin calls destroy positions. But those who structured carefully, avoided excessive leverage, chose companies with hard assets, they emerged wealthy. In Zimbabwe, the stock market was one of the world's best performing in local currency terms for years. Returns were largely illusory, didn't keep pace with true inflation, but vastly outperformed cash. The constraint is market access and timing. During hyperinflation, markets become extremely volatile. Trading gets suspended, brokerages fail, governments freeze accounts. There's also confiscation risk. Governments in crisis sometimes nationalize companies, impose price controls making companies unprofitable, seize assets outright. Stocks aren't foolproof, but they've consistently outperformed cash in every hyperinflation ever recorded. That's not theory. That's data. 6. Essential commodities and barter goods. The sixth category is most practical. Essential commodities. Barter goods. Items of immediate utility. This is the survival layer. Gold is valuable, but you can't eat it. Real estate generates long-term wealth, but doesn't feed you today. In hyperinflation's chaos, there's a level where abstract wealth becomes meaningless and only immediate utility matters. At this level, different goods become money. In Weimar Germany, the famous example was American cigarettes. They became de facto currency. You could buy food with cigarettes, pay workers, bribe officials. Those who stockpiled cigarettes before they became currency had extraordinary purchasing power. Similar dynamics appeared with coffee, soap, cooking oil, candles. In Zimbabwe, fuel became currency. Cooking oil became currency. Cell phone airtime became currency. In Venezuela, medicine became perhaps the most valuable commodity. Basic medications trade for food, services, necessities. The mechanism is straightforward. In a barter economy, which is what hyperinflation creates, value flows to items that are universally needed, difficult to produce domestically, divisible, durable and easily verified as genuine. Those who accumulated barter goods before the crisis traded them at enormous premiums during it. A carton of cigarettes costing 5 marks in 1919 might be worth a week's labor by 1923. This wasn't speculation. This was survival strategy. And at the margin, survival strategy and wealth building become the same thing. Now let's identify the pattern connecting these 6 categories. The specific items matter less than the underlying principle. What do foreign currency, real estate, gold, inventory, stocks, and barter goods have in common? They all represent real claims on real things. What do cash savings, bonds, and fixed income investments have in common? They're all promises. Promises to pay you currency units in the future. When currency fails, promises become worthless. This is the fundamental lesson. Promises can be broken. Things cannot be unthought. People who preserved wealth through hyperinflation understood, consciously or intuitively, that their wealth was only real if tethered to reality. Paper promises untethered from reality are just paper. Now, the most difficult question: how do you know when to act? This is where most fail. Wealth transfer during hyperinflation happens in stages. Stage 1, inflation is elevated but manageable. Life continues normally. Those converting savings to real assets are seen as paranoid. Stage 2, inflation accelerates. Wages lag behind prices. Some people start moving savings. Most believe government will stabilize things. Stage 3, acceleration becomes obvious. Prices change weekly, then daily. Everyone scrambles to convert cash, but conversion is now difficult. Foreign currency scarce. Real estate transactions take months. Gold premiums enormous. Stage 4, hyperinflation proper. Prices change hourly. Currency becomes meaningless. Those who haven't protected themselves are wiped out. Transfer complete. Here's the trap. During stages 1 and 2, converting savings seems irrational. You're giving up liquidity, paying transaction costs, accepting risk. By stage 3, conversion makes obvious sense, but it's extremely difficult and expensive. By stage 4, it's too late. This is why most lose everything. They wait for certainty. Certainty only arrives when it's too late to act. People who preserved wealth acted during stages 1 and 2. When their actions seemed unnecessary, they paid the cost of being early. But the cost of being early is always lower than the cost of being late. What signals prompted early action? The historical record shows consistent patterns. First, government debt became obviously unsustainable, debt that could never be repaid through normal taxation. Second, central banks began purchasing government debt directly, monetization, creating new money to buy bonds. Third, real interest rates became negative, interest on savings lower than inflation, holding currency guaranteed purchasing power loss. Fourth, capital controls appeared, governments restricting money movement across borders. Fifth, official inflation statistics diverged from lived experience. Government claimed 5%. Grocery prices rose 20%. Sixth, foreign currency premiums emerged. Black market rates significantly worse than official rates. In Weimar Germany, all 6 signs were present by 1921, 2 years before the worst. In Zimbabwe, all 6 present by 2006, 2 years before the peak. In Venezuela, all 6 present by 2014, years before the worst. Those recognizing these signs had time, not unlimited, but enough. Those waiting for headlines lost everything. We must address the uncomfortable part. Not everyone could protect themselves. These strategies require resources, savings to convert, access to markets, ability to purchase property. The poor, living paycheck to paycheck, were devastated by every hyperinflation. They couldn't buy gold, couldn't buy property, couldn't stockpile goods. They watched wages become worthless, jobs disappear, society collapse. This is hyperinflation's cruelty. It's not a natural disaster affecting everyone equally. It's a wealth transfer from those holding currency to those who don't, from creditors to debtors, from old to young, from prudent savers to connected speculators, from poor to prepared. In Weimar Germany, the middle class was destroyed. Lifetime savings evaporated. The social contract broke. This created rage. That rage had consequences. The connection between Weimar hyperinflation and National Socialism's rise isn't simple. Many factors contributed. But middle-class destruction created a population primed for radicalism. This is hyperinflation's true cost, not just economic loss, political destabilization, social collapse, institutional trust destruction. Let's return to Heinrich. He survived hyperinflation, kept his business, kept his farmland, maintained his family's position. His brother-in-law did not. The brother-in-law lost everything, his savings, his apartment, his dignity. The difference wasn't intelligence or luck. The difference was pattern recognition. Heinrich observed marks losing value faster than made sense. He didn't know the word hyperinflation. He had no economics degree. He simply noticed that holding money had become irrational and acted on that observation. His brother-in-law noticed the same thing, but couldn't believe it. He trusted the banks, trusted the government, trusted that things would normalize. That trust cost him everything. This is the pattern that repeats. In every hyperinflation, the same story plays out millions of times. Some recognize the pattern early enough. Most don't. The difference determines which side of the wealth transfer you're on. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not telling you what will happen. I'm only telling you what has happened before, multiple times, in multiple countries, within living memory. The question isn't whether this pattern exists. The historical record is clear. The question is whether you'll recognize the pattern if it appears in your lifetime, and whether you'll act in time if you do. This is historical and educational analysis, not financial or investment advice. Every economic situation is unique. Consult qualified professionals before making financial decisions. This channel exists because patterns matter more than predictions. If understanding the mechanics of systems before they fail matters to you, consider subscribing. The next autopsy will be waiting when you return.